Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media Live. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are dialing in from. I'm looking at all the comments that are coming in from right now, where people are dialing in from, and it is just amazing. We have people from all over the world. We have a lot of people from the East Coast, actually, which is fantastic. New York, Brooklyn, New Jersey, but also Houston, Texas, but internationally. We have folks from Singapore, Australia, India, is Canada. So welcome. And again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm here in California, so it's about our early evening right now. But I'm so excited for everybody to be here. First of all, welcome to our Soulcast Media Live event. We host this about once a month. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media, and we are a business communications agency. So today, we have a really special event. I'm going to introduce my guest in just a few minutes here, but just so you know, all the events that we do here at Soulcast Media, whether it's your first one or this is perhaps your fifth or sixth one, you know our passion here is all about communications, which is why I'm so excited to introduce my guest here today. And before I bring on Nixaly, who's my guest, I just want to say it's amazing. We have over 70 people right now dialed into this call. So let me bring up my guest, and we're going to get started on today's topic, which is all about communications, specifically about listening. So I'm going to bring up my guest here, and I'm going to introduce her to everybody. So Nixaly Leonardo, welcome to our Soulcast Media Live. Now, for those who are joining, again, today's topic is all about communications. And Nixaly here is an expert when it comes to communication. And the reason why is Nixaly is a communications coach. She's a psychotherapist, and she's an author. The book that she's written is really all about listening. So who better to have on here than Nixaly Leonardo? Now, I know you're calling in from the New York area, but you know what? Let's just give it a quick introduction of who you are, what you do. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Nixaly. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I'm a clinical social worker. I'm an author. I love writing, but primarily I am a therapist and I have my own private practice. But definitely communications and listening, those are passions of mine. I love helping people through communication issues, conflicts that come up. It's very exciting for me to help people through those sorts of issues.
So for those who are wondering how Nixaly and I connected and why I brought Nixaly on was I actually stumbled upon your book, and I cannot even underestimate the significance of listening when it comes to communications, right? Communications isn't just about how well you speak or how concisely you speak, though it's very important. But arguably, communications and listening skills is a huge part of that. And I have so many questions for you that we're going to dive into in just a few minutes. But for those who are joining in right now, I want to let you know that this next 45 minutes, it's for you. We appreciate you guys spending, again, your morning, your afternoon, your evening with us. So when Nixaly and I are chatting, if you have any questions for either of us, throw it in the chat function. You'll see it. It might be on the bottom or to your right, depending how you're viewing right now. But throw it in the function, and we will try to get to your questions. Because again, this next 45 minutes is for you. We want you to get the most out of it. And I know when it comes to communications, you know, the fact that you guys have registered for this event, I don't even need to say that you guys know communications is important. And because Nixaly and I are both here, we want to be a resource for you. So let's just kind of get started. I have a whole list of questions for you, but just to kind of kick things off, how did you end up deciding to write a book specifically about the listening aspect of communications? Because there's so many things you can talk about, but why listening?
I think based on personal experiences as well as professional experiences, I noticed that when it comes to communication conflicts, I see that a lot of people have problems because they're not actually listening to the other person. So for a long time, I worked with couples, and I could see very easily when the couples are having conflicts, they're not listening to each other, and when they do actually listen to each other, then the communication is successful. So I think that was probably what sparked it more than anything.
So I know you work with a lot of people kind of on even personal household dynamics, like you said couples, but of course, listening is a universal skill, whether you're at home with your kids, your spouse, or you're at work dealing with your colleagues. Do you feel that these skills, I mean, does it change depending on your environment, or is it actually fairly similar based on your experience?
Mostly similar, but there are some differences. For example, with a family member or loved one, you may use touch as part of helping you get through a communication, get through a tough moment. Obviously, with a coworker, you're not going to do that. With a family member, you might be a little more direct about something, or maybe talk about emotions a little bit more than you would with a coworker. Of course, it depends, because some people are close with their coworkers, and some people feel really comfortable with their supervisors or their employees. So yeah, I would say those would be the differences in the communication. But for the most part, generally, yes, I think the communication skills, as far as listening goes, they're pretty similar across the board.
Okay, so for those who are on this and they may think I'm a pretty good listener, like I'm attentive, like I am receptive to what people are saying. How can you judge whether or not you are a good listener? What are some cues or even some tips you can provide for folks who want to be better listeners?
So cues that tell you that you are a good listener. Okay, that would be people understand your message. You're able to get your message across most of the time. I mean, of course, it's not going to be perfect, but for the most part, people can understand your message. Also, if you are having a conversation with somebody and there is a communication issue, that you're able to get through that by changing, maybe you change the way that you communicate, or you're changing the time that you're communicating. Maybe it's you realize it's not a good time to communicate. These are all important things to keep in mind when it comes to communicating, choosing the right time and place. So yeah, those are a couple of tips. I have lots of tips, obviously, but I can go on and on. I don't know how much you want.
Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to just do a really quick, welcome again to everybody who's on the call. For those who just jumped on the last few minutes, I'm here with Nixaly Leonardo. She's a communications coach on listening specifically. We have so many great things we're about to dive into. We have about 100 people on this Soulcast Media live right now, which is fantastic, and it just makes me so happy for you coming on, and for those who are watching to join us, because we're talking about a really important issue right now, which is not just communications and speaking, but how can we as professionals and even in our personal life become better listeners, because we know communications isn't just what you say, it's really how well you listen. So again, welcome everybody. And again, this is for you. So if anybody has any questions as Nixaly and I are chatting, please throw it in. We will bring up some of the questions and we'll try to answer them, because again, this time is for you. So Nixaly, you're talking about some listening tips, techniques. So when you work with your clients, what are some things that, let's say, you would advise people to do or think about if it comes to listening?
Definitely the two things that I mentioned before, choosing the right time and place. Because if, let's say, you're trying to listen to somebody's trying to communicate something to you, but you are maybe you're rushing through to get a project done at work. That's probably not the best time to communicate. You're probably not going to be the best listener. So communicating that to them, I really want to hear you out on this. This is super important to me, but I do have this deadline that I've got to meet. So if it's okay with you, maybe we can just, maybe I can get back to you on a different time that we can talk about this, something along those lines. And then choosing the right place. I don't know, maybe a coworker could try to talk to you on your lunch break in the cafeteria or whatever. And, that's also the wrong time, but, a better place might be, and maybe it's something that is related to your performance. You certainly don't want your coworker talking to you or your supervisor talking to you about your performance when other people might be listening, right? So it's just sort of advocating for yourself and just kind of saying, hey, I definitely want to hear you out. Always acknowledge that what the other person is saying is important. That shows that you care, that shows that you're listening, that you want to listen, but you have to also advocate for yourself and say, maybe we can take this to a private space so this can actually be productive.
So it sounds like part of being a good listener is also acknowledging explicitly what the other person is trying to express or try to say, or how would you kind of elaborate on that?
Definitely. It's important to acknowledge what the other person is saying, because then that shows that you're actually listening, you're actually paying attention. And when a person feels like they're being listened to, they're more likely to be more open, they're less likely to be roadblocks in the communication, and also they're more likely to be just more in a positive state because they feel like, okay, they're hearing me out, this person is hearing me out. So I think it's really important to show the speaker that you are listening, and there are different ways to do that. You can paraphrase things that they say to you. So that basically means just putting things in your own words. Whatever they said to you, you can say, okay, so what I think I heard you say was this. And that just shows them that you're listening, right? You understand. And you have to be open to the possibility that your paraphrasing was not correct, and give them the opportunity to correct that. So still being still being open and listening to what exactly is the message that they're trying to communicate.
Paraphrasing and being explicit and sort of repeating back what you're hearing is a good way to make other people feel heard, right? And ultimately, I think part of being a good communicator in any environment is ensuring that you are making other people feel heard, because that's how they're more receptive to you too, right? And whatever it is you have to say, because once people feel that what they're saying is being dismissed, right, or people are not listening, then they may also close up.
Exactly.
Okay, so one question for you is, and because we're on LinkedIn and I know a lot of the people who are on this right now are working professionals, how do you deal with a person, and let's say it's a colleague or a boss, who you feel doesn't listen to your ideas, or you feel like they perhaps may not respect your ideas? So what are some of your suggestions or tips when it comes to that type of workplace dynamic?
So if you feel that a colleague or a supervisor doesn't respect your ideas, or just maybe talks over you, or doesn't give you the opportunity to talk, they're communicating something to you. So this is where the listening part comes in, right? You have to listen to it's not just their verbal message, but it's what they're doing. If they're interrupting you, they're talking over you, or they're just not even giving you the chance, or they just keep saying, oh no, that idea, that's no good, that's no good. You have to listen. There's something going on there, and it should be addressed. It depends, of course, right? Every situation is unique, and you certainly don't want to challenge the wrong challenge. And I say challenge lightly because you have to be careful about how you say it, of course. But generally, it's a good idea to just address it. If it is an ongoing problem, it's maybe stopping you from, being productive, getting the credit for whatever work ideas that you're coming up with, then I definitely would address that. So as far as addressing, do you want to talk about addressing it? Like how?
Yeah, let's dive into this.
So again, it depends on your relationship with the person, but definitely you want to choose the right time and place, like I mentioned before, right? So maybe asking, hey, do you think we could, not in the moment when you feel like you're not being heard, but at another time when things are okay and light, you just kind of say, hey, just wondering if we could touch base on something. Can we maybe just set up a quick meeting to talk about something, maybe just 15 minutes or so, 15, 30 minutes, and set that up. Hopefully they're open to that. And then in the meeting, you can just kind of mention something along the lines of, I think that I really love working with you. I think that, you do A, B, and C really well. And I'm trying to learn how to work better with you. And so as a result, I'm realizing that I think that we would work better if we're both talking about our ideas together and not just having sort of one-sided conversations. Do you feel like we both communicate? We're both communicating our messages to each other, or maybe do you feel like we're both open to each of the other person's ideas? Maybe they feel like you're not open to their ideas, and maybe that's why they're not open to yours. So it's important to ask.
You provided some really great tips, like within that last 2 minutes or so. So then this is going back to the question of, if you're working with somebody and you feel like they don't listen to you and it doesn't make you feel good, and obviously that can hurt your confidence as well in the workplace. So you said setting aside time with that particular person to address it, not when things are already, not when you're in the middle of something, because perhaps they're not in the mental space to want to even talk about this with you. So pulling aside time, scheduling it, just say, can we do a quick 10 to 15 minute check-in? And so it gives you time to also prepare how you want to approach this. And then the second thing that I noticed that you said in terms of your advice is you actually started the conversation by suggesting that the person say some positive things, right? I do enjoy working with you. I think we can get a lot done. I'm happy to be a part of this team, or whatever positive statement. So that's what you suggest, right? Starting out with a positive statement, and then bring up your concern, but then ending it with a question at the end, right? Do you feel the same? Kind of keeping it open-ended. And did I miss anything here? I'm just trying to paraphrase what you're saying too.
No, exactly. This is really good active listening that you're demonstrating. Yep, exactly. That's perfect. That's exactly right. It's really important to have the open-ended question, to really just, instead of directly just saying, this is what's happening, just giving the other person the opportunity to reflect and acknowledge what is going on. And also, not saying, also trying to use the I statements and we, including we, versus I feel like you're just, you don't listen to me, or I've even using an I statement in this situation, I wouldn't necessarily say right off the bat, I feel like I'm not being heard, I'm not being listened to. Instead, I would say it's got to be more collaborative. It's got to be, I want to make sure I'm listening to you, and that we're both listening to each other. Definitely, you don't want to, especially in the beginning, you don't want to, make the person feel attacked.
Mm-hmm. Would you say it helps to provide specific examples during this conversation of when you personally did not feel heard? Because perhaps the person you're talking to, they may think that they may not even be aware, but would you say it's helpful to not necessarily keep a log, but almost kind of like, if you're preparing for this conversation, to have examples that you can bring up?
Absolutely. I think it's important to have the examples ready. But that would be more in the case of, if in the event that they say, first of all, you have to get them to the place of acknowledging that there is an issue, right? Because they may not even realize that there's an issue. So after you get to that, then hopefully they're acknowledging that they're a part of the issue, a big part of the issue. And then they may, if they ask, well, I don't think I do that. I don't think I of course I listen to your ideas, I consider your ideas, right? And you just kind of say, well, I'm glad that you feel that way. I'm glad that you feel like you do listen to my ideas. But it doesn't feel that way to me sometimes, even if it's a lot of times. You just say sometimes. You don't want to use these words that can be scary for them. So you just say, sometimes it just feels like, I'll give you a few ideas. For example, a week ago, when we had that meeting, I mentioned 3 ideas that I was really excited about. And your response was, oh no, those aren't going to work. And I'm wondering if maybe we could talk about ways to make those conversations more productive, so that when you don't like my idea, that's totally fine. I want to be able to learn from that. I want to learn from what it is about my ideas that you don't like, so that I can come up with better ideas, or ideas that are more tailored to what you're looking for.
So one of the interesting things that I think many of us have experienced, and this is just kind of just living and interacting with people is that you'll notice that people tend to close off their listening when they're feeling attacked, right? Or when they're feeling like they have to defend themselves. So what are some of your kind of thoughts behind when someone's communicating, whether it's you or somebody else, how can you prevent somebody from closing off their listening, anything along those lines?
So using some of the techniques that I just touched on, as far as using the I statements, that's important. We really, and trying not to direct. I always say at first, don't directly say, hey, this is what's going on, and like clearly you're the problem. Like you don't want to do that, because they're definitely going to close down, and they're going to just get into defense mode. Right? That's sort of like an emotional threat in a sense. You're threatening them in an emotional way. You're telling them that they're doing something wrong, and people don't usually respond well to that. There are some people, of course, that do respond well, but usually people don't. And so, yeah, so I think it's important to definitely use those I, we statements. Don't be so direct right in the beginning. Definitely be a little bit more general and see if they're able to understand what it is that you're talking about. And of course, if they're still struggling with getting the point, then, you slowly get there. As far as, let me see another tip too, so that people don't close off or shut down. I think having private conversations are important too, because again, right, choosing the right time and place. If you're having this conversation in front of other coworkers, they're more likely to feel embarrassed and just kind of defend themselves right away, rather than saying, okay, it's just us in the space. Also, your tone, your volume, your voice, the volume of your voice, right? You definitely want to be, just sort of as soft as possible, so that they're not as likely to feel threatened. Yeah. Also, body language. Sorry, I just thought about that too. The body language. I have so many ideas, but yeah, body language is important too, right? Because if you're standing there, maybe you're like standing over them and talking to them and saying, this is a problem, this is what's going on. I mean, how is a person going to feel, right? They're more likely to close off and just not want to listen to what it is that you're saying, versus having sort of open body language and maybe leaning back a little bit. So that they don't feel like they're being attacked.
Right. Body language, tone. This is something I talk about all the time on Soulcast Media, because those are elements of communication that can be sometimes even more powerful than what you say. So for those joining right now, again, welcome. I'm here with Nixaly. We are talking about unlocking powerful listening skills for impactful speaking, because again, as you've heard us talk about, communications is not just what you say, it's also kind of your listening skills as well. Now, we have a lot of questions actually coming in, and they're great questions, and I actually want to pull some of them up, because I think some of these questions are probably things that people may also be thinking about as well. So the first one that I actually want to pull up is actually from Jamie. So Jamie's question is, how do you effectively listen when multitasking? So I like this question, because a lot of us multitask too. Is that bad? Is that good? How does that affect listening? Should we just not multitask? What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for asking that question, Jamie. Yes, I think that when it comes to multitasking, if you're multitasking and you get a phone call or somebody shows up at your desk, you definitely want to pause whatever else that you're doing, whatever else it is that you're doing. Of course, it depends on how quick it is. Like if a person is just saying, oh, hey, can you just follow up on this thing, or just following up on, that's no big deal. But if it's something that is relevant, that they do need to feel heard, then just put your stuff to the side for a moment. Take 2 minutes to listen to the person. Now, if they're still going on after 2 minutes and you're really busy, then that's when you have to kind of say, okay, definitely, I want to hear you out on this. This is super important to me. And I just, if I just do have to have 5 things that I just kind of have to handle right now, I'm going to make a quick note for myself. As soon as I'm done with those tasks, I'm going to get right back to you, and we can continue this conversation.
What that just reminded me of is part of being a good listener is also actually setting people's expectations too. Because what you just suggested, if somebody is in the middle of trying to talk to you and you're in the middle of doing something, I think a lot of us naturally will just be like, okay, right? We'll just kind of like shrug the other person away. But I think it's worth kind of even just kind of with your body, depending on whether we're in person or not, but twisting, like shifting your body to like let the other person know that you hear them, but then express to them in just the way you did. I do want to listen, or I do want to hear this idea out, but I'm really in the middle of doing A, B, and C right now. Can we find time at 3 o'clock later today to talk about this? So you're setting their expectation as well and not making them feel dismissed.
Exactly. And it's also called healthy boundary setting. A lot of people are yes people. They just want to say yes to everything. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And then what happens is you don't give 100% to each task or giving your attention to each person. You're just not going to be good at that because you have way too much on your plate at that point. So it's important to set those healthy boundaries where you say yes, but not right now. Yes, later.
Agree. And I think, again, it's all about not just yes, or okay, just to kind of get them off your back. But it's more like, wait a second. I do want to acknowledge this person, but I also have to respect my own time. But I also have to communicate this to them as well.
Absolutely.
So one of the other questions that has come in, which again, there's so many, and the next one I want to pull up has to do with virtual communications and in-person communication. So this question is actually from Chris. Okay. Have you found any significant differences in communication virtually compared to in person? If so, do you have any tips on active listening in a virtual environment?
So when you say virtually, you mean also just like video versus face-to-face and versus literally in person, right? Because this is face-to-face too. So, okay. Well, I think that you are able to probably read a person's energy a little bit better when you're in person. Just a little bit better. I think that, of course, it's different over the phone. Of course, over the phone, it's a lot harder. But when you actually see a person's facial expressions, you can see their body language, although you can't see all of their body language because sometimes people are just like really zoomed in on the camera and you can't really tell what's going on. They may be kind of like tapping their fingers or, tapping their legs or whatever. And you don't realize that they're actually distracted or they're nervous or anything like that. So I think that is one of the differences that you'll see in between virtual versus in-person communication, that you're not able to get a full read on their communication, on their body language. But as far as tips on in a virtual environment, some tips I would say, I think it's important to show people as much of yourself as you can. Of course, dress the way that you would if you were to be in person. A lot of people just kind of they turn their cameras off during these meetings, and they're just kind of like in their sweatpants or whatever. And I just think that it's important to be part of being fully present in the virtual work environment is getting dressed in your work attire, and it just helps you kind of just be present, be your work self. And it helps you, I think it helps you be a better listener too, as a coworker, as an employee, etc.
So one of the things that I think about when it comes to virtual communications, because that's sort of the world a lot of us are in right now, whether it's a hybrid or fully remote, but a lot of us are on these video calls. And I think, more or less we've kind of gotten used to it, but I still think there's probably a lot of things we can do to improve our virtual communication skills. That's why personally I'm a huge proponent of people turning on their cameras when they're in these meetings, because you really can see a lot and, read a lot by people's body language of whether or not they're listening, right? But I guess one of the challenges, and you kind of touched upon this, is sometimes when you're in these meetings, not everybody's cameras are on, and that they signal that they're not listening because their cameras are not on. How do you adapt to that? How do you prevent that from kind of hindering your speaking when you're seeing all black screens and maybe just a few video boxes?
Well, I think that you just have to keep in mind that whatever it is that you are talking about in that meeting, if they're going to benefit from it, then they need to listen. they need to be engaged. And so you just kind of have to assume that, well, I'm going to say what I need to say, and hopefully they realize how much they need this information, and so they are paying attention, and not think about, oh, they're probably just doing chores, or I don't know, reading, going online, or looking on YouTube or something. Just trying to keep in mind that the information you are saying is relevant, and if they're just going to be the ones to lose out if they're not listening to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have to point out, and this is kind of like a tip as well, but in order to get people to listen to your ideas, you also have to be very mindful of who it is you're speaking to, right? Messages, communications, it's not oftentimes a one-size-fits-all model, right? You have to tailor your message to a specific audience, and most importantly, what they care about, because that's going to increase your chances of them actually listening to you. There's actually a really good tip that I actually want to bring up. It's not necessarily a question, but this is a really good one. One tip for virtual. The camera sucks up a lot of energy, so it is important that you bring up your energy level. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you'll appear disengaged and boring, something I learned in my TV news days. So, Darlene, I completely resonate with that, because my TV news days was all about energy as well. When you're speaking, people tend to drum out if your voice is very monotone, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to increase your chances of people listening, you also have to show up in a way that's going to get people wanting to listen to you too. I don't know, any tips on that, Nixaly?
Yeah, definitely. That makes perfect sense. A lot, the computer screen is usually small, or sometimes people are looking at meetings maybe on their work phones or whatever. And so imagine, when you're in person, it's a whole person in front of you versus this small screen. So I think that makes perfect sense. That's a great tip. Thank you for sharing that. It's important to speak just use more intonation in your speech, just seem more engaging with your body language, with your tone, so that people are more likely to pay attention.
Yeah, so far we've kind of talked about that there's two sides to listening. You're the listener and other people listening to you, right? And you as a listener, we've kind of talked about these tips of, making sure that you are paraphrasing, finding the right moments. But also, if you want people to listen to you, right, how can you tailor your communications so people are receptive? And earlier we talked about, when you're talking to people, to not also be so, we didn't use the word aggressive per se, but sometimes if you come off too aggressive, people will kind of tighten up and not listen, right? Because they're being defensive. Yeah. So Nixaly, we have so many other questions, and I also have a lot of other questions, but I want to give you kind of like a chance to share. So for people who are on this call right now, if you could provide them any tips, kind of things that you would encourage them to walk away with when it comes to communication and listening, based on the people you've worked with. Obviously, you've written a whole book about this as well, but just things that you feel that maybe people know, but really what you see is you really should think about this to be better communicators in the workplace.
I think what's really important in the workplace, especially with regard to communication, is recognizing that you're dealing with people. These are real people who have real emotions, and just thinking about the multitasking example, or anything else, even if you're just in the middle of a project, you're in the middle of writing an email, whatever it is that is going on, if a person presents themselves to you, you need to be in the present moment. Or if maybe you're just in a meeting and you need to listen to the speaker, but you have all these to-do items in your mind, write those things down. Try to really say, okay, these are things that are on my mind right now, and it's going to be really hard for me to listen and pay attention in this meeting. Let me write these things down. After the meeting, I'm going to address them. But really, it's important to be present whenever you have a person in front of you, or on the phone, or even just virtually too, right? You have to treat them like a human. It's just, we forget. I think people just forget. It's like, okay, this is an actual person. This is not just to-do list. Just okay, get that done. These are people. We're all people. So just sort of keeping that in mind, I think, is an important point.
That is such an important golden nugget that I think sometimes all of us have like a long to-do list, of things we have to like check off every single day. You're just trying to get through it. But when you're interacting with people, you're totally right. I mean, you're talking to another person who has feelings and thoughts and have emotions, good and bad days, right? It's funny because communications is what we do here at Soulcast Media, but sometimes I find myself really teaching people more of like the human dynamics, right? Because communications is truly understanding human dynamics, emotional intelligence. You mentioned the word being present, and I love that because so I also teach executive presence in terms of like how people can develop that executive presence. In fact, one of my most popular LinkedIn learning course is all about how you can develop executive presence on video calls. Over 1 million people have watched it. Be sure to check that out for those who are listening who have not seen it. But part of people having executive presence is making other people feel that you in that moment are entirely present, right? I feel like people can lose executive presence when they're just being distracted. So one of the other things that I have been actually wanting to ask you related to the things that we've been talking about is, so similar to virtual communications, but when people are in meetings, okay? And in meetings, obviously there's tons of people talking, and sometimes if you want to say something, you're trying to get a word in. And what if you feel that the other person, or let's say the other people on this team, are not really listening to your idea? And it's not because any one of them, is not wanting to, but it's just the dynamics of a team meeting because there's so many people on a call. Any tips there on speaking up in a meeting and trying to get the team to listen to you?
That's a tough one, because it really depends on, like you said, like the dynamic of the meeting, the dynamic of the members. Maybe, sometimes people don't like each other and you just don't know whatever the situation is. It depends on how what your relationship is like with each of the members, as well as in the group. What role do you play in that team? If you can't get a word in, if you've tried, I'm gonna talk about if let's say you try to speak up. Oh, you say this quick thing, and then they just maybe change back to whatever else they're talking about. There's not really anything that you can do that's not going to seem rude, where, okay, hello, I'm trying to talk here. You don't want to do that. I think that's something that if you notice it's a pattern, then definitely talking about it after the fact, maybe with specific people who you feel like individually, specific people who you feel like have been maybe taking over more of the meeting, or are talking over you more than others. In the same way as we talked about before, just sort of setting time aside to speak to them alone privately, so that you can try to address that. And maybe even after the meeting, you can share an email with some thoughts. That's also an idea. Just kind of say, hey, I didn't get a chance to, to talk about these points, but these are some ideas as well. Let me know if you guys, what you guys think, if you want to maybe talk about it in the next meeting, something along those lines.
It's hard, because a lot of us, we all have great ideas that we want to share, right? And it's easy for us to feel discouraged when we do develop that confidence to, oh, I'm going to share this idea. I'm so excited about this idea. And then you say it, and then it just seems to land on deaf ears. For you as a person, you may feel kind of, dejected, rejected, and that's how people, I think, and a lot of people I work with kind of feel this lack of confidence. And I think it's because they feel that they've tried to speak up so many times, share their ideas, that nobody's listening. So they just say, I give up, it is what it is, or, So for people who are feeling this way, this way of feeling like, does my opinion even matter, right? Because nobody seems to listen. What would you say to this person if people have felt this way?
Yeah, I do see this a lot. One of the things that I have to mention is that sometimes, unfortunately, depending on the situation, sometimes you'll have a supervisor who actually doesn't really care about your opinion and actually is just asking just to ask, or a coworker who's just asking just to ask, just for the sake of it. But they're not actually trying to listen. Again, I do think that if it becomes a pattern, you should address it. Try to even though it's easy to feel discouraged and to feel like, okay, maybe my opinion, just, I don't have good ideas. It's easy to just kind of get to that place to sort of have low self-esteem in the workplace because of that. Try to remind yourself that you don't really know what's going on the other end. You don't know why they're interrupting you. You don't know exactly why they're not listening to you. That's why I think it's important to have a conversation about it and to try to empathize with them and say, okay, if I were them, and let's give them a benefit of the doubt. Why might they be doing this? If it's not malintended, why might they be doing this? And so thinking about that first, and then also trying to have a private meeting with them to talk about this pattern that you've noticed, and just ways that you can contribute that they'll be more open to. Okay, maybe my ideas, the way I'm presenting my ideas, it's not really effective. I want to be more effective here. I want to be more productive with our conversations or in these meetings. What do you have any tips on what I could do to bring ideas that actually are more interesting to you or to the team?
And this actually made me think about another point, that communications also isn't just about what you say in these meetings. Communications is also via email, via some sort of like chat channel or text message, right? If you notice that your boss tends to not be receptive to you in like big group meetings, but if you email them something, they are responsive, because that's also a form of listening, right? Even though it's not verbal.
Absolutely. You're choosing the right mode of communication is another important, it's just an important aspect of communication, because sometimes, even just verbally, sometimes you'll have a coworker who just gets worked up easily. You probably want to try out, maybe like Slack or email to communicate with them if you notice that they get worked up very easily. Some people just communicate much better through media versus verbally. So definitely, that's a great point. You want to choose the right mode of communication with whoever it is that you're talking to.
So this last 45 minutes just flew by. I don't know about you. It just flew by. Wow. And we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes here. But again, if anybody has any last minute questions, please throw it in the chat function, because we want to make sure that we address your questions. But since we're kind of like wrapping up here, Nixaly, is there anything else that you kind of want to share with folks of, again, tips that people should know when it comes to listening, even things with confidence? I always say confidence and communications actually go very much hand in hand, because if you don't feel confident, you tend to not really communicate. It's just natural to feel this way. Any other tips of people who, and this may not even just be listening, but just any general communication tips for people to help build up their confidence when speaking, and things that you have seen in this workplace or even personally?
Right. Well, I mean, confidence can and usually is actually a pretty deep-rooted issue that a lot of people, just so many people have. It usually stems from childhood or just past experiences. Even if you had a great childhood, but maybe just having a boss that is sort of demeaning, or even emotionally abusive in some way, or yells at you all the time, and that's going to bring your self-esteem down. It really depends. So there are lots of different ways to handle this. Sometimes what you need to do is just change jobs, unfortunately. And I know that's easier said than done. I realize how hard it is to find another job in a lot of fields. But that's only if you're being emotional, if you notice that there's some sort of abuse going on there. But with self-esteem, things like mantras, just like daily mantras, just writing down some things that you're really good at. Think of a coworker, or maybe a current or ex-supervisor who liked you or likes you, and think, okay, if I were to ask, or if I were to ask them, what do they think of me? What do they think of my work ethic? Or what do they like about me as an employee? What might they say? And then just kind of make a list of these things, and then bring that list up every day and remind yourself of these things. And if there are things that you do need to work on, identify those things that you need to work on, and figure out how to work on them, right? As long as you're working on them, nothing's going to be perfect. Nothing's going to change overnight, but just keeping in mind, okay, I am working on this. Okay, I tend to I tend to interrupt people when they're talking to me, but I'm really working on trying to be more aware of it, more mindful of it. And so don't feel so down on yourself about it, because you are actually trying to get better at it. So yeah, I would say those are some tips, just sort of like daily mantras and reminders.
Yeah, I think what you said is really, really key, is that, maybe the way people are responding to you, obviously it's impacting you a certain way, but in some ways we also have to protect ourselves, right? To not let that pull us down. And then we kind of spiral down into this hole of being like, oh, people don't really care about what I have to say. You also have to remind yourself that no, like just keep trying, just keep doing it. I do want to pull up one last question as we kind of wrap up today's session, because I do think this is actually quite important in terms of what people have experienced too. So I'm going to pull up Robbie's question, actually. So what if you had a conversation on a few occasions with concerned individuals and the other person doesn't respond to your question or concern? Rather, they open their own agenda as to what you are doing wrong. So they're basically putting it back onto you. So what do you think here on this last question?
So, okay, so they might be feeling attacked. Maybe something about the way that you eat. And sometimes you might bring up things, just keep in mind, sometimes you may communicate in a light way, in a way that is empathic and kind and using I and we statements, but still people feel defensive, because some people are just like that. Based on their own experiences. So let's say, if they're doing that, they're turning it around on you, then they might be feeling attacked. What I would say is, what you would have to do here, I would say, is redirect. Try to redirect the conversation. Acknowledge first what they're saying. Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't realize that was an issue. I do appreciate you bringing that up. I definitely want to talk about this. But we did start the conversation talking about XYZ. So I wonder, can we just finish up that conversation and then we talk about these concerns that you're having? I definitely want to address that. I'm sorry to hear that. I just don't want to get derailed.
I love that. It's redirecting the conversation, not necessarily dismissing it, so what you just did was like, you repeated the other person's kind of concerns of whatever it is that they expressed to you, but you also are not you're ensuring that they're just not dominating the conversation with whatever it is that they want to say, because what you have to say is quite important too. So that's really a good tip. So Robbie, hopefully that was helpful for you. So we're about to wrap up here, but Nixaly, how can people find you? Where can people contact you? Tell us a little bit more about the book that you have, if you want to learn more.
Yeah, so this is my book. It's Active Listening Techniques, 30 Practical Tools to Hone Your Communication Skills. It's available wherever books are sold. It's on Amazon. It released last year and it's already sold over 2,000 copies. It's got 4.5 stars. Yeah, so and a lot of people message me individually to tell me how helpful the book was, and it's really, really just heartwarming. I love seeing those messages when people tell me, oh, I read your book and it was so helpful. So yeah, I love promoting my book because I know how helpful it's been to so many people, and I wanted to keep helping more people, of course. So that's my book. And as far as contacting me, I have a website. It's practicalonlinetherapy.com. So that could be a way to get in contact with me. I am on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, I'm Life Parent Coach. But yeah, I think those are the ways to communicate, to get in contact with me.
For those who RSVP'd for this, we will be sending out an email, a recording of this session, but we'll also link Nixaly's book so you guys can take a look and check that out. But Nixaly, again, I just want to thank you so much for your time, for spending the last 45 minutes, 50 minutes with us here. I know it's your evening over there in New York, but I think what we talked about today was just so important when it comes to communications. You provided so many great tips. Again, for those who RSVP'd for this, you will get an email, kind of like a recap of some of the things that we talked about. If you didn't, go to soulcastmedia.com and get on our email list, because this is where we notify you of communication events, recap of these lives that we do. Now, for those who have attended our previous Soulcast Media Lives, Our next one that we have coming up is actually going to be in 2 weeks. And it's also going to be about communications. It's going to be with my friend Lung, who is the chairman of Citibank in South Asia. So it's going to be a really, really good conversation about career visibility, but it also has to do with communication. So if you are interested in attending that event, go onto our website, soulcastmedia.com, and you can put in your email address because that's how we notify you of all these upcoming events. But again, thank you everybody who stayed on. We had over 100 people pretty much on the entire time who are just watching and listening. We appreciate all your questions because again, this time is for you. And we really, I mean, my whole philosophy is if all of us become better communicators, I think all of us just become better professionals. We enjoy work more. You know, I just think communications is one of the most important skills. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nixaly, for staying on. And we will talk to everybody soon, and please keep in touch. All right, thank you.